Started. Thank everyone for coming along to Animal Welfare Lightning Talks. So we have 3 great speakers lined up for you who've been set the challenge of giving you all the information they can in about 10 minutes about what they do. So we are going to smash through that, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. So just a reminder that you can post questions in the live discussion feature on the swap card if you're going into the event itself. There'll be a live discussion. So post your questions there, and we'll have Q&A after we have spoken. So without further ado, I will introduce the first speaker, Sam Perkins, who is the CEO of Cellular Agriculture Australia. Sam has taken on many roles around sustainability strategy and R&D, but he's going to be talking to you in his latest role as CEO.
Thank you. All right, can you all hear me okay? Yeah, great. Up at the back, excellent. Hey, great to be with you all, and thanks for having me. I'm going to be talking to you today about the wonderful world of cellular agriculture, its potential, some of the challenges that the sector's facing, and some of the work that we do trying to solve those challenges at Cellular Agriculture Australia. I'm just going to set myself a little cheeky timer. 10 minutes is not long. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to highlight that I'm an ally of the LGBTQIA+ community and the neurodiversity community here in Australia and around the world. We're going to jump right in with a question to all of you. What is at the nexus of these 6 global challenges? We have food insecurity, deforestation, biodiversity loss, climate change, public health, and animal welfare. If you were to draw a Venn diagram of those 6 circles, what would you put at the centre? Time's not on our side. I would put our food system at the centre of that Venn diagram. And that's not to say that our food system is the direct and exclusive driver of any one of those, but it is a significant contributor to all of them. And that situation's only going to get worse, because our population is set to reach 9.7 billion by 2050, which is an 18% increase on today's numbers. And in addition to that, we have an increase in the per capita demand that we have on our food system. And the FAO predicts that by 2050, we're going to have an increase in the demand of our food system by 70%. Now that increase, if we're able to increase our supply in order to meet demand with our current production methods, that's only going to exacerbate the situation I outlined above. And so we've come to a fork in the road. Do we move towards more intensive production methods to continue to keep up with demand? We've seen incredible innovations across our food and agricultural systems over the last 100 to 150 years, where largely we've been able to keep up with our demand for food. It should be noted that we have largely been able to do that when there's a layer of privilege involved, because we still have a situation where north of 9% of our global population are severely food insecure and malnourished. So we can continue down that track. However, that's likely to exemplify many of the 6 challenges that we've outlined above. Or we can fundamentally change the way the demand side of the equation looks. We can shift more and more towards a plant-based diet, which many of you may have already started on that journey or are well down that journey. I certainly am, myself. But that requires a personal commitment to change. And at the root of that change is behavioural change. Food is something that is inherently emotional. It is something we have a lot of unconscious bias around. The development of new technologies, new food types is relatively easy compared to the amount of challenges that you face in helping people move towards adopting a new way of being, a new way of working, a new way of eating. So what if I was to tell you that there might be another way, another solution, another option, where we could reduce emissions, land use, water use, we could improve food security, health and well-being, whilst removing the unnecessary suffering for billions of sentient beings around the world? I believe there is another option, and I believe that that option can also significantly remove a lot of the barriers to adopting a new way of consuming. And I believe that cellular agriculture has the potential to play a significant role in that picture. which uses cells and innovative biotechnologies to produce foods, ingredients, and other agricultural products that have the potential to be truly accessible, ethical, and sustainable in the future of our food system. So let's have a look at that in a bit more detail, because there are two key technologies involved in cell ag. There are actually more than two in general, but there are two that the sector in Australia currently focuses on and that get the limelight, generally speaking. The first of which is precision fermentation, which has its roots in synthetic biology, and precision fermentation harnesses the power of microorganisms to create functional ingredients like proteins and fats that can be used in a range of foods and agricultural products. So let's look at that in a bit more detail. How does this actually work? We start off by identifying something that we want to create. Let's say we want to create whey protein, or one of the casein proteins that would typically be extracted from dairy milk. We then identify and we create the gene that maps that particular protein before we insert it into a microorganism like a yeast or a bacteria, which is then fermented. And as that yeast or bacteria is fermented, magically, it produces whey protein, which can be extracted and purified and then used in subsequent food processing. Precision fermentation has been used for decades to produce insulin and rennet. Most of us don't realize this, but it's the truth. But nowadays, and with the emerging and evolution of the synthetic biology space, we're able to also produce a range of other products that can be added to the food supply system that we currently have, such as milks, plant oils. Of particular note within the plant oil space, which many of you will resonate with, is the likes of palm oil, and a range of different proteins that can be used to produce the likes of cheese, protein powders, and ice creams. The other important technology is cell cultivation. So let's look at how that works. For cultivated meat, or for cell cultivation that produces cultivated meat, which some of you will have heard of, you start off by selecting an animal and a tissue type of interest. In this case, and in the diagram, we're talking about beef, likely. You identify the type of tissue you want before selecting and isolating the cells that are most likely to produce that type of tissue. These cells are then cultivated within a special media formulation, which emulates the environment the cells would see when they were in the animal. So they grow, they multiply, and then they mature. And as they mature, they turn into the tissue you desired at the beginning of the process. Meat, legitimately meat, before they can be harvested and turned into a variety of different food products, such as meat, fish, and typically the cell cultivation space focuses on the animal-derived components, but it can also be used to produce coffee and leather. And one thing that's really interesting is the untapped potential of leveraging the biodiversity that we have across the animal kingdom to create a whole range of foods that we have probably never tasted before, such as the liger burger. So what's different? How is this fundamentally different? Well, one of the things that I believe is fundamentally different is, although there is a significant amount of social acceptance and behaviour change required to accept new technologies, it doesn't come in the form of changing people's eating habits. Cell ag has the potential to produce foods that are indistinguishable from what many people have been used to consuming that have come from animals and or other places. And that sets a really interesting precedent for introducing something into the supply chain that will help people move towards a more values-aligned choice. So what is different? Can any of you pick the difference between these two images? I sure as hell can't. On the left is a cultivated meat product produced up the road in Brunswick by a company called Magic Valley. It's a cultivated lamb taco. Here, cheese, stringy, pulley, twangy cheese. The one on the left, produced by EAGxAustralia Foods out of New South Wales. And here, two ice creams. They look identical, they taste and feel, and the sensory experience is arguably indistinguishable of each other. The one on the right is produced by Brave Robot using precision fermentation. It's starting to sound pretty utopian, right? It sounds like we've got it, the silver bullet. It's far from that. And I really want to emphasize that a lot of what I've been talking about is talking about the potential that lies within these amazing emerging technologies. And there is a catch, and that catch is the sector's nascent. Like, the sector is evolving. The technology is proven, the technology works, the products that can be produced are amazing. But we've got a few obstacles that we need to overcome. We have an untested regulatory environment. And that means that companies don't necessarily know what they need to do to get tested and prove that their products are safe for sale around the world. One of the biggest barriers we have is we've got a number of companies who are in their nascent startup stage. They're producing R&D prototypes and proofs of concept, moving through scale where we can start to drop the cost of goods to have price comparable products that are genuinely accessible is a significant challenge for the entire of the ecosystem. And there are a number of significant technical challenges remaining, particularly in the cell cultivation space, where we're talking about whole cut meats that potentially replicate your ribeye or your whatever else eye that you might be able to extract from an animal. That being said, we really need to be cognizant of the fact that although the technology is amazing and emerging, the sector needs to focus on these challenges if it's genuinely going to succeed. Luckily, we have this incredible sector in Australia that is rapidly expanding, where there are new initiatives, projects, companies and organisations starting to focus on and overcome a number of those challenges. And we are one of them. Cellular Australia is the only organisation, and we're a not-for-profit organisation, dedicated to trying to ensure that the cellular agriculture sector contributes to the future where we have an accessible, sustainable and ethical food system. And we believe that cellular agriculture has a significant role to play in that future. So how do we do it? We start off by acknowledging that many of the challenges listed before, many of the challenges that the sector is trying to overcome, cannot be solved effectively or efficiently by one company alone, or by bilateral collaboration. We need a cross-sectoral approach, and our role is to try and fill up the ocean, or the rock pools, so that there is this rising tide that lifts all boats. We're looking at creating equitable solutions so that new companies can start and existing companies can thrive towards this new and emerging, accessible, ethical and sustainable food future. We do that by focusing on supporting companies navigate and work their way through the food regulation system in Australia. We support awareness raising and developing the foundations for new courses, units and degree programs to be created. Importantly, we focus on bringing together diverse stakeholders from across the sector, be that the private sector, academia, investors, government, bring them into the same room. Let's talk about those non-competitive spaces together. We try and focus on creating a common language base for the sector to use when advocating for itself, to government, to future consumers. And importantly, we're working to ensure that there's an accountability framework in place, whereby a lot of what I've talked about above, we need to be able to demonstrate it. We need to be able to prove that this is actually a better way to go. And until we can do that, we're kind of shooting on the whim of hopes and dreams. They're hopes and dreams that I believe in, but it's something that we want to be able to prove. Now, if you'd like to know any more about what we do, hop on our website. I've just been given the end of session message. I thank you very much for your time. It's been great having you here. It's been great being here. I look forward to your questions in a little while. And before I do leave, I'm going to leave with one message that I think is particularly important. Thanks.
Right, while they're finishing getting set up, I'm going to introduce Ren Springlea. Ren works as a research scientist at Animal Arts. They are also co-founding a new project focusing on humane fish slaughter in Mediterranean fish farms and have been involved with the Animal Justice Party.
Thank you. I've got a this is the teeth clipper, and this is the tool that they use on farms in Victoria, in Australia, around the world to clip the teeth of baby piglets. That's a routine operation. Sort of, it's kind of, yeah, probably doesn't feel good. I'm not sure if you want to give it a go or. I've got a CO2 canister. I think there's one that'd be a bit more commercially evil. This is the one that you use to put carbon dioxide into your bike tires. You get the bigger ones, which are sort of those big canisters, and they're the ones that they use on pig and chicken slaughterhouses to kill those animals by carbon dioxide asphyxiation. I'll stay in the footage. If you don't know what that feels like, it's physiologically pretty much identical to being strangled to death. That's sort of the level of panic and suffering that we're talking about. I just wanted to start with this up front to emphasize that this is an artifact problem. Animal warfare, sometimes we have hard to visualize, but we could drive 20 minutes and be at, farms, slaughterhouses where this is taking place. Sort of just southwest, I guess. And sometimes I like to think about if this were humans, if we had a situation where the equivalent numerically of the entire global human population were being slaughtered, tortured, and killed all around the world about every 2 weeks, how seriously we would take that as a cause area. The evidence supporting a lot of animal advocacy interventions is typically very strong. This is what I think about full time. And one of my observations is that the thinkers in animal advocacy are, I know a lot of nerds, most of my friends are nerds, and these are some of the most rigorous and humble thinkers that I've had the pleasure to work with. To give you an example, at Animal Ask, one of the things we do is to partner with existing animal advocacy organizations and recommend to them what the most impactful interventions for them to work on would be. And the way that we do this is by beginning with a list of hundreds and hundreds of different ideas. We spend weeks brainstorming that list, and then we sort of whittle them down one by one until we're left with just 2 or 3 ideas that are not only extremely high impact, but typically have a very strong supporting evidence base. That's one of the most important things that we look for. And you may be surprised at the sort of rigor of some of the research that exists, particularly in academic research, but also in just movement expertise generally. I wanted to emphasize one more thing. There's a lot of thought around things like, there's a moral surrogate spectrum, for example, where we have an idea that humanity, cares about a certain number of different types of beings, and that's expanding over time, and that our job is to, make that keep happening. In my opinion, this is an untested idea. I think it's an interesting idea, but I think it's one that needs to be evaluated far more rigorously before that can be used as evidence to claim that victory is going to happen automatically. Cellular agriculture, again, very promising, still lots of technical hurdles to work out. Humanity as a species has made some staggering moral improvements over the years. They don't happen by default, that's my point, is that we need really smart, really passionate people working on this. That's how change happens. Happy stuff. So there's lots of different ways to have an impact in animal advocacy. These are 3 that I quite like. So working with farmers to improve the standards of animals living on farms. Fish Welfare Initiative. This literally started out as 2 nerds with no real expertise, don't know why I said that, who applied to the charity entrepreneurship incubation program, which we'll talk about in a second. And now they run one of the most impactful and cost-effective animal advocacy organizations on the planet. Policy and lobbying, this is more my speed. Party politics, legislative lobbying, there's loads of latitude here to have impact. Collar Animal Law Foundation recently released this sort of how-to guide full of concrete advice, and I've got a couple of reports on how this can work in party politics in particular. I've got an EA forum post which I've made, which I've linked to my swap card, and also in my EA forum profile, if you want to see any of these resources I'm talking about. And public outreach for meat reduction. I've recently finished an in-depth analysis on this, and the evidence in support of this having an impact is actually quite robust. And probably not the most cost-effective thing the movement has access to, but I think the absolute impact per dollar is quite large in terms of the amount of suffering you will. There's quite a diversity of skills that can be put to use to help animals. I've sort of collated this list just from surveys of the movement, job boards, and so on. If you're a data and policy nerd like me, fantastic. If you're a social media nerd, that sounds like my website, but that's fantastic also. You know, like talking to people, if you want to work in government, the supply chain, there's quite a lot of latitude there for different ways to have an impact. And I think, you know, to think creatively is often more than is typically imagined. Artificial intelligence. What's in particular. If we think that AI is going to be transformative for humans, then there are reasons to think that it will also be transformative for animals, if not more transformative. If you're into medicine, we've got interventions that have theories of change, you know, decades, years, months, until the payoff happens. If you're into long-termism, you know, the arguments in favor of long-termism apply equally well for animals as they do for humans. There's actually quite an exciting area, and there's a few people working on this. There's an active online community. Questions like extinction risk, what does that mean for animals? Suffering risks, what does that mean for animals? And even on sort of a more like mundane sense of if automation tools, which are currently being put to use in factory farms, change the equation of farming economics, that could make it even more challenging to finance. There's a researcher called Fire in Hong Kong, I'm good friends with, and he has been doing some initial research on how generative AI tools can perpetuate biases against animals, which is one way that this could be ingrained in our culture in a way that's really hard to remove. Getting started, I think animal advocacy is, I think the big challenge is that it's a bit non-linear in that because the movement, the animal advocacy movement, sort of advances and evolves every year. There's progress every year, but that also means that it's harder to chart a concrete sort of career path if you like stability like me. But there are lots of different options. Jobs, volunteering board, of course. Animal advocacy careers has a great job board, a great volunteering board, and an online course and in-depth skill profiles about a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about. Launching your own independent project. Bit more edgy, but I think this is criminally underrated as a career option and probably easier to follow than you might think. The easiest way to do this is to apply to the charity entrepreneurship incubation program. The applications for the current round are open for another week, and basically they'll, if you get in, they'll take you, train you up, give you an idea, an impact charity idea that is, give you a co-founder, and typically take you up for the seed round as well. And Aidan Alexander, who works for charity entrepreneurship, is at the conference. I think he's got one of tomorrow. So yeah, definitely reach out to him if that's something you're interested in. If you want to see animaladvocacyafrica.org has a global list of funders in the animal space who can fund independent projects like this. And there's also funders specifically working at the intersection of animals and long-termism. Other cool stuff that you might enjoy, how I learned to love shrimp, banger of a podcast. I have it on good authority that this is the single best way to unwind after a long conference. So if that's you, then probably check that out. They have interviews with people from the movement, all the different work. So you know, that's one way to get good insight into what the day-to-day life, you know, doing this sort of work is like. Online communities. I think my favorite is Impactful Animal Advocacy, which has a Slack group of I think over 1,000 members now and an associated newsletter. And there's also an animals and long-termism specific community on Discord. And even just reaching out to organizations and people. This is how I got started. You just email somebody and say, I love fish, can we talk? And yeah, eventually that's what paid role somehow. And yeah, you're more than welcome to come and chat with me. Send me a message if you want to talk through your options, or if you want help thinking of a high impact charity idea. That's my jam, so yeah, definitely don't be shy. And yeah, before I wrap up, I've got an EA forum post which you can access if you go to my sort card or into my year for a profile. That's got a long list of links to everything I talked about today. And that's it for me. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Ren. Again, we're just going to take 1 minute to click over. Alrighty, so we have next Michael Dello-Iacovo. Did I do that right?
Yeah, thanks.
Nailed it. Michael currently works for the Sentience Institute as strategy lead and researcher. He has also co-founded the Life You Can Save Adelaide and has been the CEO of Effective Altruism Australia. And he has been involved with the animal justice.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me and coming to hear me talk today. I'll be talking about some key considerations for long-termist animal advocates, overlaps and some opportunities. So I do work for Sentience Institute. I won't be representing SI today, but I will be drawing on some research that I have done while working at SI. Quick overview of what I'm talking about today: long-termism and traditional animal advocacy. Just a bit of an introduction to these two. I won't spend too long on that. Then I'll transition to talking about some overlaps between these two spaces that I think often gets overlooked, and end with some considerations and opportunities, hopefully for long-termist animal advocates and also long-termist and animal advocates separately. Long-termism, and this is from the Finn Morehouse's Introduction to Long-Termism. It is the ethical view that positively influencing the long-term future is a key moral priority of our time. So there may be so many future lives that if we value them at all, then positively affecting the future becomes extremely important. If someone might value future lives equally to current lives, but even if you value them a little bit, I think it's still important to think about long-term. Caveat to this is it's very difficult to know what our impact is in the future. It's hard to work out what the different historical events, the impact they had on the present day, let alone thinking about the impact of our current actions on the future. That is true, but I don't believe this is an argument against long-termism. I think this is an argument for spending more careful consideration on the impact of our actions on the future. Traditional animal advocacy, when people usually think about animal advocacy, typically they think about farmed animal advocacy. This doesn't seem very long-termism. This is about animal suffering in farms now. But there are several ways I think we can broaden the scope to see traditional animal advocacy through a long-termist lens. My motivation for this and for this talk in general is I often see some proponents of long-termism and separately proponents of animal advocacy neglecting the other and putting less weight on the other. And I think that's a shame. So one, one way we might see animal advocacy through a long-termist lens is ending animal farming sooner. So obviously, the sooner animal farming ends, the sooner farmed animal suffering ends. So we can see every incremental step towards ending animal farming as achieving that long-termist objective, which has a longer-term effect than just say if I'm one person reducing my consumption of animal products. That obviously affects animals now, but it's part of a broader picture of ending animal farming sooner and having that long-term effect. But it may not be a fact that animal farming will ever end at all. You might think that actually it might not end, it might likely never end. So if that's the case, then increasing the likelihood of it ending is actually really important for reducing suffering in the long term. If humanity ever does grow beyond Earth, it seems important as well that we end animal farming before we ever see animal farming on the scale of multiple worlds. That might be a long way off, but animal farming may be a long way off. So we might want to try and, that might be an argument for us trying to make sure that we end it before we see that. If we ever do see animal farming in multiple worlds, say Mars or the moon, we might expect it to be a little bit more locked in as part of humanity. It might be harder it's hard enough to stop in one world, stopping on multiple worlds at the same time might be even more difficult. The implication of this is that perhaps increasing the likelihood that animal farming ever ends at all is worth some trade-off in shorter-term gains. Environmental flow-on effects. So the effects of climate change and other human-caused environmental harms will affect humans and non-humans for centuries at least. To the extent that animal agriculture causes these environmental harms, then reducing or ending animal agriculture will reduce the long-term harms of environmental damage and climate change. Wild animal suffering. Many animals suffer greatly in the wild. Convincing you that this is a problem, that it's a big problem, and separately that we can ever safely do anything about it or that we should is well beyond the scope of this talk. But if you do accept that many animals suffer greatly in the wild and that we should do something about this, even if we can only safely reduce wild animal suffering by a fraction, this might be extremely good in the long term. Imagine we find some way to reduce the suffering of animals in the wild by 5% by eliminating some disease that's quite prevalent in the wild, but doesn't have any negative flow-on effects. In the long run future, if you think Earth might last another however millions of years in the future, if we could reduce that suffering, that's quite a big expectation of the concept that I'd like to introduce to you today is this idea of tech change versus social change. Reduction in animal farming, and this applies more generally to a lot of different problems. But reduction in animal farming is driven by two different types of change. So you can think of like tech change versus social change. There's not a clear-cut distinction between the two, as I'll point out in a second. There's a bit of grey area and overlap between them. But some examples of things that are quite firmly in the social change action side are things like anti-speciesism activism or expanding the moral circle. And then things that are quite clearly in the tech change side are the development of animal-free food technology, such as cellular agriculture and plant-based food technology. And then also other peripheral technologies that make AFFT easier. These aren't necessarily directly producing these products, but any technology that makes producing AFFT easier. Obviously, producing AFFT today is a lot easier than it was 100 years ago due to a lot of other technological advances. Then there's some things that overlap and are quite clearly one or the other. Things like promoting AFFT to consumers. That feels like more of a social change action, but it does rely on having that tech change as well. And then regulation of what's called AFFT products. For example, a lot of jurisdictions are looking at banning the use of the word milk to refer to soy milk and other plant-based milks, or banning people from using the words like sausages or meat or mince on plant-based food packaging. This is regulation about AFFT, and it's a regulation about technology, but it's driven by social change, political change, and legal change. So most stories of moral progress, when we think about them in history, are described as being socially driven trajectories. Some quite clear examples are the civil rights movements and the women's suffrage movements. However, numerous moral victories also appear to have been driven by technological change. An example being the use of, the development of the automobile and some other technological advances, largely replacing the use of horses in farming and transport. Now, we may see a similar end to animal products, perhaps one at a time through tech change. Now, I say one at a time because you might see an end to, say, chicken, the farming of chickens due to a breakthrough in cellular agriculture for chicken products specifically, but maybe not for other products. So while replacing horses in transport and farming is generally seen as a victory, it does have potential downsides that I'd like to flag, that I think sometimes a bit neglected. Because horse riding still exists in some other forms, like for entertainment, such as horse racing, this victory being won through tech change might be potentially a missed opportunity. Just as entering factory farming through technology may be a missed opportunity, if we end up animal farming through primarily technological change, we might have not really solved the underlying problem of why people don't see animals as being morally worthy. And that might be something we miss out on. It's of course difficult to say what the counterfactual would have been. Maybe if we never ended horse use for transport through technology, maybe we'd still be using horses today. It's not necessarily said that we would definitely have solved that problem. It's just something that I think it might be a potential downside that when we think about the long term and kind of the post-animal farming landscape, we might want to think about. So tech change and social change obviously affect each other. They don't exist in a vacuum. It's unlikely to see one without the other. For example, any tech change, access to more animal-free food products is going to make the social change easier, and social change is going to create more demand for the tech. For example, Brock Bastian and co-workers found the mere presence of animal products causes people to give less attribution of mind to animals. So easy access to the cellular agriculture and similar technologies would likely make the social change easier. But in general, I'd argue that social change and animal farming may make it more likely that we treat other sentient minds better by spreading good values. Of course, it doesn't speak to how easy social change is versus tech change. That's a different question. But for example, if digital minds end up becoming sentient, we might expect to see them treated better if most people accept that we shouldn't farm animals prior to that. humanity may exist for many aeons to come, and the way that animal farming ends, I think, has a substantial impact on that longer term future. Whether it ended primarily through social change or tech change may have great implications for how our success in tackling those future great dilemmas, like how to deal with digital minds, but also other things like cooperation into the future. A couple of questions I'd like to leave you with just to maybe start a conversation or get you thinking about. Is there an optimum ratio of social versus tech change when it comes to animal farming and also any other area? Is it more important to end animal farming faster or to focus on making sure that we're better set up to tackle future moral dilemmas? And how much does it matter whether animal farming is outlawed or just made increasingly obsolete when it comes to further tech change, but also how likely it is that animal farming actually stays ended and doesn't revert to animal farming, say, in 1,000 years. So in conclusion, I'd like to see long-termists and animal advocates talking and working together more than they currently do. I think there's a lot of important ways that both of these spaces overlap, and hopefully whether you're an animal advocate, long-termist or both, I've given you some things to think about and maybe start a conversation. So thank you, and happy to take any questions after.
Yeah, so if you've got any questions, pop in the chat, but I might just start us off. I just wondered, obviously, we've got you guys sort of work across a little bit of a range with regards to animal welfare, sort of animal advocacy side versus the tech side, and talking about the tech versus social change. I just wonder whether you think there's much scope for collaboration across those different disciplines.
I know you emphasise it enough, but both in the cell ag space and work I've done previously, I think the tech side is the easy side. I think we have solutions to any technical challenge that we currently need to solve on this. That's my personal view. I think it's the adoption of those new technologies that's at the crux and where the real impact and I guess scale of impact is going to be achieved. And I don't think there is another sector that can speak to that more directly than cell ag. I think without social acceptance and social adoption of these new technologies, at the end of the day, they're not going to be solved. And if they're not going to be solved, the impact through them is not going to be achieved.
Yeah, I think that was great, and especially I think in kind of the middle space is where there's a lot of opportunity for overlap. Where I mean, producing cell agriculture tech is great, but as I said, if we don't have like the social, legal, and political change to go along with that, we might get blocked by we can have perfectly functional cell agriculture that's cheap and easy to use, but if we don't have the kind of legal advocacy as well, we might see that impact, especially by a lot of very deeply entrenched interests in animal agriculture. So I think there is potential for overlap, but it's also really critical.
Great. Move on. All right, so I've got a question here from Lucas. The question for Sam. What's your take on recent economic studies that have suggested it may be difficult to scale cell ag enough to replace animal? So it's a challenge to it being the easy option.
So I would start off with, I personally think there's two ways of looking at this. Firstly, I think if we consider that the demand for food is going to increase by 70% by 2050, there's a heap of additional supply that we need to inject into our current food system to meet up with that increased demand. And I think that's something that's important from a messaging standpoint. That cell ag, I think, is going to be a complementary solution for a long time. It's going to be complementary to the traditional ag space. It's going to be complementary to the plant-based space. When we start moving towards, I guess, the genuine scale and where it could start to be seen as a dominant option, I think there is. I think that I'm actually lost. Can you repeat the question? That part of the question.
Yeah, of course.
Down my little rabbit hole, starting to struggle to pull myself back out.
Yeah, no, totally fair. So the question is, what's your take on recent economic studies that have suggested it may be difficult to scale cell ag?
There we go. Right. To be honest, I mean, most of the economic studies and most of the sector professors, there's not enough data to do anything accurately at the moment. And hence why it's really important that a lot of the messaging we're talking about is there is potential. I think the potential has been shown. The potential will only be realised, in my opinion, when companies one, yes, overcome the technical barriers, but also make sensible decisions. For example, around like there's a heap of arguments around that cell ag will use more energy. It's like cool. That's a bit of a new point if you produce that energy using renewable means, right? And a lot of the energy that goes into the current livestock industry, we don't equate the energy that goes into the crops that we produce. We then have to transport the animals that they grow. So I think it comes back to part of the advocacy work, the accountability work that we're doing is we don't think there is an existing framework that necessarily deals with all of the impact areas of cellular agriculture. And we think that needs to be developed and put in place so it's the sector can, I guess, for one of them, put its hand on its part of an evidence base and objectively highlight that it is a better option. And it can substantiate many of the claims that it would need to as it moves to the step. Good question. Thank you. Sorry for going around bushes.
No, that's great. Thank you. This one's for Michael, but I think Ren, you might be able to comment on it as well. How do you think long-termism might change the priorities of the animal advocacy movement?
Yeah, so good question, thanks. I think one key way I sort of touched on briefly was if we end animal farming, it's not guaranteed that it will come back. So I'd like to see a little bit more attention on how do different ways and different strategies of ending animal farming actually make sure that we keep it and or increase the likelihood of it staying on term. So I think that's one. Others, I mean, like, yeah, how does how we end animal farming affect other future model change? Digital mines is one, but also does it matter for other things like cooperation? How much does the fact that we still farm animals, how much does that affect cooperation between humans, between nations, between other groups? I think these are tough questions, but one that not many people have specifically looked at yet. So I think those are a couple of ways that if people would think about long-term success, some things to look at.
I think all indication is that if we're looking at the scale of hundreds of thousands, millions of years, that it's possible that humans will be the dominant life form, but that's in history before. So I think I'd want some evidence that'll be the case, and the conclusion from that is that there's going to be a load of animals. I think that's actually quite an exciting opportunity because then you get things like, okay, well, we could have 1 million times the impact, 10 million times the impact with some of these long-term interventions. It's all quite exploratory, but even things like, okay, well, if some rich billionaire is wanting to settle Mars, go on his way, then can we please not very nicely not stay chickens there? That would be, probably a quite cheap intervention. I'm not sure whether it was a success, but worth a crack. And that's something that you could sort of like take advantage of that path dependence, set that precedent, and then that's something that could, with a disproportionately low amount of effort, have a disproportionately high impact. And I think sort of when you're looking at the intersection of long-term as like this, there's a lot of opportunities like that. Are you going to ask God or the billionaire? Is there a difference?
All right, thank you for that. This is for Ren again, but again, I think we might be able to comment and maybe Sam as well. So from Jay, in regards to evidence supporting the effectiveness of different advocacy ideas you mentioned, is there much evidence about forms of animal advocacy efforts that are least effective or, on the other hand, detrimental?
Yes. So we've found that Elon Musk, for example, we will look at hundreds of interventions and maybe a half dozen of them will actually have enough evidence to support the idea that they could. And there will be numerous that will have a detrimental impact. For example, we did some studies last year. Perfect divestment campaigns is one example. My colleague Max Carpendale did a report looking at the evidence for the impact of divestment campaigns, which is basically when you go to universities, supermarkets, banks, and say, can you pull all of your money out of infants and agriculture? The evidence doesn't support this does anything. It has some important second order effects, like people leading the movement and getting people giving something to do with that sort of thing. But the numbers are very, very small. Meat tax, I've started some conflict with this, but if you model the economics of a meat tax, which a lot of animal advocates think is quite a good campaign, basically by increasing the price of meat, you switch consumers away from cows towards chickens, which means you kill more animals and you make them suffer more, just because of how the economics works out. So I think that's sort of the importance of thinking really rigorously, making sure we have a really robust theory of change. We really do as much as we can to try to shoot down our own ideas, because that's the only way that we can see if we're actually doing what we think we're doing. Because you have to you've got markets, ecosystems, those other things involved, it can get very complicated.
Great. And Michael, Sam, got opinions about what advocacy is particularly effective or not?
In particular, I just wanted to build on what Ren said about the meat tax. So it's meat tax seems a good idea that has a potential downside. I think environmental advocacy as well. Sometimes you might have to be careful with how you do it, because again, sorry, that's beef or cows being the main contributor to environmental impacts, climate change, and the different animal products. If you sell people too strongly on the environmental impacts, instead of driving them from beef to plants, you might go to fishes or chickens, which seem like they have lower environmental impacts, but because they're a lot smaller as well, a lot more lives, you need a lot more chickens to get the same amount of food as you would need to get from one cow. So that's a way that I think a well-meaning environmental messaging as well could potentially have an insight.
Right, I think I might just ask one more question to wrap us up, and I'm just going to brief off of what you were sort of talking about, Michael, in terms of social change versus tech change, and sort of interested in the tension between those two things. And we've got someone on the tech side and maybe someone more on the social side. So, like, what are the areas of conflict there that we need to iron out, if any?
It's a really good question, and I don't know I have an answer for that right now. Yeah, thanks. I want to think about that. Yeah, I haven't answered yet.
Anyone want to take one?
I think typically there's a lot of synergies rather than conflicts. If you go to a politician and you say, can you please change this law in this particular way, or you go to a supermarket and you say, can you please adopt this particular breed of chickens, it is not possible. And there's a lot of cases where basically the tech change comes first, the United Kingdom adopts a particular law, and then the rest of the world adopts that same law. And that's a trajectory we see surprisingly often. So I'm not so sure about conflicts, but yeah, I'm kind of optimistic in that regard.
Yeah, maybe I do see conflicts, but maybe the conflicts that come further down the track because of an underappreciation of the social side from the tech side. I think that's where quite often we see tech side, and I can speak quite extensive experience working in humanitarian and development sectors within the introduction of appropriate technologies in low resource settings. It's typically really easy as a quite privileged male engineer to go in and see a problem that I can solve. Right? That's again the tech solution is the easy solution. Unless you have a deep appreciation of the social impacts and or the social dynamics that could create, or that would be required for that solution to be adopted and reach its impact potential, you don't get that far. And I think that there is typically, and I don't think this is just within the sort of tech or engineering space, I think there's generally an underappreciation for the value that social sciences and other areas of fields of study that arguably are at the centre of being able to identify the right problems to solve, and then being able to develop the right solutions such that they're desirable for people who get a benefit from them, and that flows into a whole other areas. And I think that does create a tension. And I think that tension sometimes comes out in the fact that quite often as a society, we tend to put more focus on the technical solutions. Whether they work, whether they don't work, seems to be almost of a second order importance. And sometimes the reason they don't work, we tend to shy away from the fact that they don't. It's not that the technology doesn't work, it's that nobody wanted it in the first place because we didn't put enough focus or we didn't take enough time to deeply understand what the problem space was and or involve end users in the development of the solution. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting space. And I hope it's something, that South Africa that needs to embrace more and more as it goes forward.
Great.
Actually have something.
Sorry, I thought of something just quickly. So something I see a little bit with the promise of tech change, like cellular agriculture. I see some people say things to the effect of, yes, you've sold me animal farming is a problem, but I'm going to wait for cell ag because that's coming. And it would be a pretty big shame if a lot of people waited for that and it never came or it took too long. I think that maybe that could be a tension of perfectly answer the question, but yeah, it's one thing I think it's frustrating to see because yeah, I think a lot of people just feel like they're waiting for that. Might never come or it might come much too late.
Great, thank you. All right, I think we might wrap that up there. So thank you very much to our speakers.